Hi everybody, welcome back to another edition of VoxRes. In today's episode we're going to be giving the cam cover a clean and also checking the valve clearances. In the last episode we saw how filthy dirty it was inside the engine, and we had a quick look in the rocker cover itself. This is just another example of how much sludge and carbon build-up there was inside there. It's absolutely filthy, this rocker cover. Every single nook and cranny is full of great big lumps of sludge and carbon. And it's no wonder the engine's having breathing issues, because I should imagine this has blocked up the breather system. There's quite a bit of oil dropped inside the inlet manifold as well, which means it's probably been sucking in oil. I spent quite a while trying to clean this up. As you can see, it's absolutely filthy. I'm trying to scrape bits and pieces out of it, trying to get it out of all the nooks and crannies. I'm just beginning to wonder whether it's worth doing, to be honest. We just tip the rocker cover upside down, give it a little tap, and that's the stuff that's just fallen out of it. There's still stuff caked into it, but anyway, going to give it a chance, try and give it a little bit more of a clean up, and see how we get on. So despite an hour or so of cleaning and some liberal applications of degreaser, you can still see it's filthy. That's the little breather valve there. There's a diaphragm valve under there. You're supposed to be able to get that out, but trying to pick it out, all I can hear is cracking, breaking plastic. So I'm sort of beginning to wonder whether it's worth it at all at this point. It's just absolutely filthy. You can see the amount of grease I've got out of it there. So there it is, filthy dirty. Absolutely disgusting, still gunged up with loads of sludge. That bit of plastic at the top, those little bits with little slots in them, you can see are part of the breather system, which you can't get apart, so there's no way you're going to get in there to actually clean anything out. So I took the plunge and decided not to go any further with this and to actually buy a nice shiny new rocker cover. There it is. It was sold as an original part, an OEM part. Brand new diaphragm valve in there, of course. Notice there that some part numbers have been scraped off of it. I was a little bit concerned about that, but I contacted the seller and he assured me it was an OEM part. It looks exactly the same quality wise. There's a few little casting differences there. You can see the part number there on the old cover. Compared to the new one where it's been scraped off. So there's a few different markings, but it does look really good quality. Obviously we've got the advantage that it's got a brand new diaphragm valve fitted in it. Obviously it's all going to be clean inside the breather system, and also it's got a nice shiny new gasket already fitted. So I think that's the best way to go. As I say, it was quite expensive. There were some cheaper ones I could find online around about the £40–50 mark, but all the OEM ones, all the ones that were listed as OEM, were around about 90, I think £95 I paid for that. So anyway, we'll get that fitted on the car at some point, but before that it's time to have a look at the valve clearances and the camshafts. So here we are again inside the cam or under the cam cover, just in checking the lobes again, you can see there's no real wear on them at all, nice and shiny where they've been running on the cam followers. All that black stuff on the bearing caps in between the cam lobes is actually carbon deposits, so we can still see that this engine is filthy dirty inside. The oil is thick and black, but we'll give it a good oil change at some time, probably run it with some cheap oil for about 500 miles, and then give it a good proper oil change. So the first thing we need to do is remove the lower wheel arch liner, because we need to get access to the bolt on the end of the crankshaft. This is just held in with a couple of plastic clips, one there, and there's a couple of Torx bolts. I think it's Torx bolts there. I've given it a liberal application of WD-40, give it a fighting chance to come out. And then if we crawl down underneath the car, we can see there's a couple more bolts. I think they're just 8mm sockets that fit those bolts, again giving them a liberal application of WD-40 to free them off. And also, while I was under here, notice we've got a bit of an oil leak. If you remember in the previous video, there was a lot of muck on the front of the rocker cover, the cam cover. I guess it's been leaking out the front there and running down the front of the engine. So when we get the new cover on, we'll give that a clean up underneath there. And see how we go. So got one of these little pry tools, just use those to pop those clips out, the little plastic clips. It's worth pointing out there's a little pin in the middle of those clips that you want to retain. You can push those out, which makes it easier to remove the clip, but you do tend to lose them if you're not careful. So this tool, just a quick mention here, is part of a kit I bought. It's got a load of plastic stuff there for plastic levers and things for removing interior trim. Bits for removing plastic trim. Those little silver things with the rings on the end are tools for removing various stereos, unlocking those and getting those out of the car. So I thought it's just worth mentioning those. Very, very useful if you're going to be taking things apart. So we've now got the wheel arch liner, or the part of the wheel arch liner out. There was another bolt I found hidden just there. That's the hole for it, and it was actually bolted in up under there, but I could pull that other piece of inner liner out of the way to get to that bolt. So that's what we're trying to get at, this great big bolt on the end of the crankshaft, so we can turn the engine over by hand. And I think we use a E18 socket, so that's quite big. There it is. If we can get it into focus, you should see that that is an E18. There we go, E18 Torx socket, female Torx socket, long extension bar and a fairly hefty ratchet, and we can put that on the end of the crankshaft and turn the crankshaft over by hand in a clockwise direction. So what we're trying to achieve with this, to start with, is to get the engine at top dead centre. So the way we do that is we look at the camshaft sprocket. So these are the two sprockets that the timing belt drives to turn the camshaft, or the camshafts rather. And if you see there's two little white marks, you can see the one on the left hand side quite clearly, the one on the right hand side not so clearly. When these are lined up, the engine should look something like this. So we can see that is the inlet valves for cylinder number 2. And these are the exhaust valves to the right of my finger there for cylinder number 3. They should be pointing up. That's cylinder number 1 there, number 2, number 3 and number 4. They're the inlet valves. And number 1, 2, 3 and 4 again for the exhaust valves. So cylinder number 2 should be pointing up. The cam lobe should be pointing slightly up and slightly towards the centre. The same for the exhaust valves for cylinder number 3. So they're pointing slightly towards the centre, almost straight up, but just slightly towards the centre. So now we move on to adjusting the valve clearances, set of feeler gauges. What you want to be doing is starting with one that's around about the right size. The sizes we'll look at in a minute, and just check where that fits underneath. Always keep it clean, because we're measuring down to 0.01 of a millimetre here. So a little thin film of oil can actually make a big difference. It can easily be 0.1, 0.2 of a millimetre thick. feeler gauges come in sets with various sizes. You can see there we've got a 0.5 and a 2, I think, so that's giving us 0.25, sorry, 0.05 and a 2. That's giving us 0.25 of a millimetre, and we try and slide those underneath. So what you're looking to do here is just feel a little bit of resistance. It shouldn't be tight, and you shouldn't need to push them underneath. You can see there the feeler gauges are bending up a little bit, so we know that's a little bit tight. They should just slide in, not too slack, just be able to feel them rubbing on the gaps. So with the engine in this position at top dead centre, we can measure the inlet valve clearances for cylinder number 2 and the exhaust valve clearances for cylinder number 3. So again, just getting a combination of feeler gauges. As I say, they range from, I don't know what they're up, about 0.5, 0.6, maybe up to 1 millimetre, down to about 0.01 of a millimetre. So we just get the right combination, keeping them clean every time we add another one, and just sliding them underneath the gap between the cam follower and the bottom of the cam lobe. So what I've done here as well, just done a rough drawing of the engine layout, just so I can roughly record the results. And then what we do now is we rotate the engine through 360 degrees. That's one rotation of the crankshaft pulley. Again, doing it on the bolt that we saw earlier with the E18 socket. So we rotate the engine round one full rotation, 360 degrees. And now you can see we are looking at the inlet valves, the 2 inlet cam lobes for cylinder number 1 and the 2 exhaust cam lobes for cylinder number 4 are now pointing up and in the right direction, which is slightly towards the middle of the engine. I've just made a slight adjustment to that. And you can see they're now both pointing up but slightly to the centre. So that's inlet cylinder 1, exhaust cylinder 4. And again, using the feeler gauges, you just slide those underneath. Seems to be a little bit tight, so go for a slightly smaller one. It seems to be quite slack, so we just start adding small amounts, wiping the oil off and adding smaller feeler gauges and repeating the process until we find that good fit. Like I say, just a little bit of friction. You'll know when you feel it. It's either too tight to get in or you can feel it slacking about, slopping around. You just want to get it so it's just nipping, just slides in easily, but a little bit of friction. And now we do the same thing on the inlet valves for cylinder number 1. And when you're happy, just record the results on the piece of paper that we drew up earlier. And basically it's a case of repeating it on all the other cylinders. Now that we completed the tests, I've come indoors and I've written up all the results a little bit neater so we can see them. So I just want to point out a couple of things about the compression testing we did in the last video. The test I did initially was a dry cold test, and you can see the results across the top there: 170, 170, 150, 178. Then I did a dry warm test. So what I did is ran the engine, warmed it up to normal operating temperature. Now, be very careful when you're doing this, because what can happen, obviously the engine gets very, very hot. Components of the engine get hot. Don't want any of you guys burning yourselves. So obviously even taking the spark plugs out, they're going to be very, very warm. So like I say, just be careful. Wear some decent gloves and long sleeve shirt just to protect yourself. So I would have thought that these test results from the warm test, they would have been a little bit higher as the metal expands. But in fact, they all stayed the same with the exception of cylinder 3, which dropped to around about 140. So it dropped 10 psi. Not too sure why that is. Maybe some of you guys can drop a comment below and let me know what your thoughts are on that. But it definitely indicates we have got a problem with cylinder number 3. Cylinder number 4 being the only one that's really in tolerance. So I then did a wet warm test. Now what that is you just drop a little bit of oil down each cylinder, and that helps seal the piston rings to the bores. If the compression increases, we know we've got wear in the cylinder bores or on the piston rings, and in this case we can see that we have got a little increase on cylinder 1, a little increase on cylinder 2, about 8 psi. And also on cylinder number 3, we've got quite a big increase. So that's gone up by what, 30 psi. So that indicates that we've got piston ring wear or cylinder bore wear. Cylinder number 4 didn't increase at all. So that looks like that one's as good as it's ever going to get. Now, if these compressions hadn't increased at all, with the introduction of oil, you only need to put a little bit, maybe a tablespoonful. If it didn't increase, then we would know that we'd got problems with the valves not seating properly, and it wasn't piston rings or cylinder bore wear. So on to what we've just been doing: valve clearances. Tolerances yet again. Inlet tolerance is 0.21 millimeters to 0.35 millimeters. And nominal, meaning the ideal, is 0.25 millimeters. And the exhaust valves, likewise, we've got 0.27 to 0.35 of a millimeter, and the nominal is 0.3 millimeters. So inlets, every single one of them were at 0.2 millimeters, which is a tiny little bit out of the minimum tolerance. Now remember, we're looking for these gaps to be getting bigger to cause a rattle. They look like they've got slightly smaller. I think this is probably due to the mileage of the engine and the valves receding into the head a little bit, which makes the valve stems come a little bit higher up in the engine, which obviously closes the gap. That's my only explanation for it. Again, if anyone's got any comments on that or any observations, and I'm talking complete and utter rubbish, please let me know down below. So yeah, as I say, they're all just about on the minimum tolerances. And that one is obviously bang on the nominal value, the ideal value. All of the exhaust valves, again, most of the exhaust valves, 6 out of the 8 are fine, spot on the tolerance, spot on the nominal value, except for the 2 on cylinder number 4, which have tightened up a little bit by 0.05 of a millimeter. And obviously, just to remind those people, a lot of you know, but those that are novices and just learning, we've got 16 valves in total. So there's 2 inlet and 2 outlet valves per cylinder. 4 cylinders, that's 16 valves. That's where you hear the terminology 16 valve engine. That's what it means. So that's why we've got a total of 16 results there. Well, that's a wrap for this episode, everybody. Hope you've all enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and leave any comments you've got down in the bottom. Until next time, it's goodbye from me.